Katie, I mean, we got everything from here, from the Mitchell Miller stuff to potential sexual misconduct allegations to we're talking verbal abuse allegations. There is a lot here. And it's funny because every time you hit like a picture or something, you think, oh, that's got to be the end of the article. And then it's something else. And I guess I don't even know where to start, but I would like to start maybe with the thing that people understand the most and we've heard the most about, which is the Mitchell Miller stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was sort of a really big story. And then obviously John Chayka leading into that, which we can get to in a second. But, you mentioned it in the article, and without giving too much of it away, it kind of gets into explaining not only just that situation, but a mental health trainer who raised concerns beforehand, correct?
Yeah. So my understanding, what my reporting revealed was that, there was obviously significant upheaval in the front office between the scouting department's final draft meeting in June and when the draft took place in October. And so under the previous regime in June, they had this big draft meeting, as most teams do, and they discussed Mitchell Miller, who was, skill-wise considered to be a top prospect. And there were a number of concerns raised about him stemming not only from this issue, but I should add his lack of transparency and what they felt was perhaps a lack of remorse about the situation as well. And in totality, kind of combining those things with the act itself, that he was convicted for racist bullying and taunting of a Black disabled classmate in middle school, they took him off their draft board. They said, we're not going to draft this kid. That's that. And sometime in between that to, there being significant turnover to the draft in October, a lot of teams also made that deduction that they were going to take him off their draft board. And then obviously the Coyotes made that very fateful pick. And so it led to a lot of finger pointing, in this daily sense of shifting blame for, who was responsible for that. And, what you saw was a very dramatic about face in terms of the front facing communication from the organization about that pick. If you remember that when the pick was first made, it actually didn't get a ton of traction. The Arizona Republic did a great story on it a few weeks later. There was massive outcry, and the Coyotes originally kind of tried to spin it as, we talk about inclusivity and diversity, and this is an example of us willing to be open-minded and work with this individual to, in a sense, rehabilitate him or make him a sort of productive, member of society and help him seek help and, treatment or whatever. But then the outrage, I think, just got too much for them, and they cut bait on him a day or two later.
Right. And then there's the John Chayka situation, obviously, which you get into a little bit, but really, when you're talking about the ownership group, they seem to stress family and then do exactly what you wouldn't want your family members to do.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I this quote didn't make it in the piece, but I remember asking a current employee, for all this talk about family, what do you make of that? And he was like, shit, this is a pretty dysfunctional family. And, I think that is one of those, that's sort of Alex Morello's underlying ethos that he preaches, not just within the Coyotes, but with his other business endeavors too, is this idea of family and that, we're in this together and we need to treat each other like we would family. And that notion is what many employees, both current and former, find, offensive, disingenuous, laughable, etc. A lot of people said to me, when he's saying that, he means his family, and that the people that are within his inner circle, but we are not being treated as family. This is not how families operate. This is not how you would treat someone like you would want your family members to be treated.
Katie, I'm very confused because you mentioned current employees of the Arizona Coyotes, and I heard from a very reliable source called the Arizona Coyotes that it was only disgruntled former employees. Did you actually talk to current employees of the Arizona Coyotes?
I did. And, that was, I think, conveniently overlooked by them, when they were assailing my reporting. I think to try to chalk it up to a few disgruntled employees is pretty reductive. And I think, the appropriate thing probably would have been to be a bit more introspective and reflective of why there were, current and former employees who were sharing this information and sharing their experiences with me and what that says about their experience in the workplace as it stands. But, I put the work in there, which is that, I spoke to over 50 people, and that includes current and former employees, as well as people that, have longstanding business relationships with the team, who regularly do business with the team, who interact with the team in a variety of different capacities.
Well, okay. So I know that you did speak to one current employee because it's confirmed at the beginning of the article. That current employee, we know, lectured you on journalism, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And his name is?
Bill Armstrong.
Right. So when you hear from a general manager like that, on a personal level, is that jarring?
I mean, that conversation was definitely jarring. I would, that's an appropriate, if not generous, characterization of that. I would say it's not uncommon to hear from GMs who are either upset at what you have written, upset with your sort of avenues of inquiry when you're reporting. That's very typical stuff. I've dealt with that, throughout my career, and especially more now as I do more, the bulk of my work now is investigative work. And that often leads me kind of to the underbelly or the more sordid, difficult subject matter. I don't write about rainbows and unicorns. So it's generally something that is going to piss people off. So that is not uncommon. I would say the nature of that phone call and the tenor of that phone call was pretty wild. And to the sense that I definitely made a bunch of calls afterwards and was that was very unusual. And, I don't.
He insinuated you were stealing, and he insinuated you would go to jail, correct?
No, actually, that's initially what I thought he was saying. And I kind of tried to clarify that with him because I did initially think he was accusing me of committing a cybercrime. But then I think he seemed to believe that someone internally was stealing his information or externally was stealing his information and funneling that information with me. I'm not quite clear if he thought that I had a sort of direct role in that or was just the recipient, but he made it very clear that he was unhappy that he thought that was happening and that he thought that was wrong. I made it very clear to him that I felt he was bypassing a pretty obvious explanation that was much more plausible, which is that I am a good reporter. He did not seem to think that was a viable explanation. And so I don't typically, include interactions like that in a story just because I'm loath to inject myself into any story. But the reason that I did is because I felt like the behavior was germane to the story itself. When you are writing about paranoia and fear and bullying and threats and intimidation, and then you have people, who are extensions of that organization exhibiting some of those hallmark behaviors, I do think that is instructive to include in the piece. And in some ways, I think you can learn more about an organization by the way they act and the way they react to what you're looking into than by getting any sort of exclusive one-on-one interview. And so that's why I included it in the piece. I thought it was important for people to know.
What has the response from the league been? We know the Coyotes released this statement trying to denounce the article, but has there any been internal talk from the owners or Bettman specifically about what's written in the piece?
I would imagine there are some conversations being had. I have not been in contact with the league about this. I can tell you that last week I went to the league to let them know that I was going to be publishing this story this week, that I felt like there was significant content that they'd like to, weigh in on or comment on. They politely declined to do that, which is their prerogative. And I circled back with them on Monday, the day before the piece published, and I did present to them a list of very detailed questions, laying out some specific elements of the story that I felt warranted a response. They again declined to comment. So it's hard for me to know exactly what the dialogue has been, among league officials or, with the league and the Coyotes, or with the league even and, other owners and the board of governors. So I don't have a great answer for you on that. I'm very curious to see how the league will handle this, but I don't have any firsthand information at this point of how they feel.
Going back to Bill Armstrong for a second, I correct me if I'm wrong. I think one of the things he mentioned was, what if I went around the league and told other GMs, about your methods of reporting, and et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Have you heard from any other league executives since the story has been released?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've heard from quite a few, and like universally supportive. And, I think there were some people that were really upset to hear that, that was his approach. And, there's some people, just kind of let me know that they read the story and that they were not pleased with what they had read. So, that was nice, but that was never a concern for me. That to me that would never deter me. And I think, it was such a sort of a jarring moment. And I was so kind of taken aback by some of the things that were said. But, I from my recollection of it, I do remember, saying that I felt very confident with my reputation around the league, and that, I work very, very hard at what I do. And I think that's reflected in the quality of my work, and that I don't think he could tell GMs whatever he wants like that. But I think most know how I operate and the extent to which I go to do my due diligence and to provide fair, accurate, nuanced, thorough reporting.
And to be clear, you have not received an apology from him?
No.
Okay.
And I don't need, honestly, I don't need.
No. I didn't think you did, but I did want to say, he's had an opportunity to cool off and think about this. And I just wanted to know.
And here's what I will say, just both about sort of the statement in which, they came after myself and my publication and that incident is I'm a big girl, believe me. And this is not the first time I've gone through something like this, and it sure as shit will not be the last. But what I can tell you is that when that statement was released, I would rather have them come after me or come after the Athletic than go after employees or retaliate in any ways against their employees, because those are the people who are really in a tough situation right now. And I wouldn't have written this story if it weren't for, employees who were in a really tight spot in a precarious position and who felt like they had zero form of recourse, besides talking to a reporter, because things were, in their minds so toxic and dysfunctional, and there was no help on the way.
Just a couple more questions for you, Katie, because this, it's just such an unbelievable piece and there's so many angles on it, but I have to ask, what even tips you off to start something like this? What's the thing you go, I got to look into that a little further.
Yeah. So I think because I deal in some of the more underbelly type stories, I think, people come to me a lot with tips, and which is wonderful. And I'm, buried in them sometimes. And I wish I could give all of them the appropriate amount of attention that they deserve. But what tipped me off to this, and I don't generally do pieces about financial impropriety or anything like that. Like
missing bonus checks to players, things like that.
Yeah. So that is actually what tipped me off is I I had heard some generalized grumbling in the playoff bubble that players weren't getting per diem and that there were some weird things going on. And so I just kind of like put that, filed it away and put it on the back burner. And then I had heard that players were missing, like were not getting paid their signing bonuses on time, which is like no small thing, right? Like that's something that the union will hop on right away because that's part of a standard players contract. It's collectively bargained. It's not a suggestion. Like when you pay a guy his signing bonus, like he needs to get it on a certain date. So once I started kind of pulling string there and reporting that out, I found out that there was a large outstanding balance with their arena management company that was several months overdue. And so I started to maybe kind of think, what else is there that I don't know? And so I would just kind of keep following these facts and talking to people and asking every single person, who else should I be talking to? And I'll tell you that we almost published this story at multiple different junctures. And invariably, every time that we were on the precipice of publishing the story, something else wild would happen. And so we would hold off and we would kind of push it down the road. And it became one of those things that I've given birth to 2 children, and this kind of felt like a third, like it lived so long that it was a bit of a relief to get off my plate. I felt like people thought I was like just stalling and procrastinating, and I wasn't. It was just a matter of like, we knew that we had to kind of keep going, and we owed it to the story to keep going, and that we would know when the story was there. And it took a while. It took probably 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
We learned a great deal from it, from your work. Have you learned anything since?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Is there a Coyotes 2?
So there are definitely elements of that story that I want to dig in on further, and I plan to do so. I can tell you that they had a town hall meeting with their employees after the story ran that day, and they told them, hey, we want to really stress like that there's an open door policy here. We want to be transparent and stress honesty, and we want to be here to hear your concerns, complaints, criticisms. On that same call, they also said, we also want to reiterate that speaking to the media is grounds for dismissal. So, I think there were people on that call that, may have been sort of heartened by some of the intentions of this idea of like transparency and honesty, and really kind of digging deep to think about some of the things that were expressed, but then, kind of felt like it was window dressing. And so,
right.
That just kind of gives you a glimpse into what's going on.
Because if you're an employee and you come forward, they're going to be like, oh, they've got questions and concerns. They probably spoke to the media. Like it sort of puts a bit of a target on you, don't you think?
Yeah. It's not just that. It's that people, this is a workforce that has been whittled significantly over the past year, and especially exacerbated by COVID. And so there's like this fear that if you're going to be a squeaky wheel, that you will be shown the door. And, one of the parts in my piece, like that I stressed, was there's this never ending like specter of litigation too, that people are scared of like getting sued. This is a person of ample means and resources. Like no one wants to take that on. That's scary. Like, especially in a pandemic when you're relying on paychecks and like health insurance to feed your family. And so, there are a number of things that I would like to follow up on. Some of the financial stuff I would like to dig in a little further. I will say that I heard from several employees that I did not talk to who said, hey, I just want to let you know that even though I didn't talk to you for this piece, I really saw my experience at the company reflected in your piece. And I wanted to reach out just to thank you for that. And that made me feel really good. Like that even, I cold called a ton of people, right? And like, some people hang up, some people don't talk, some people do talk. But that even the people that I didn't get a chance to talk to felt like they recognized their experience in the piece.
Wow. Well, it is and I don't think anybody will disagree with me here, Katie, this is a breathtaking knock you off your feet piece of journalism. Like there's no other way to describe it. Like, I don't think I've ever read anything that blew my mind in terms of just the depth and the breadth of this story. So congratulations on telling the story the way it is, and hopefully it creates meaningful change, right? Because when these things are uncovered, oftentimes it can lead to good changes, although it sounds like they're up to their old tricks. And based on the culture that you kind of showcase in the article, it doesn't seem like there's a desire to want to change. They seem to be perfectly happy the way they are. But all the same, hope that there is positivity that comes out of this one way or the other. And you are a phenomenal journalist. And we just needed to say, holy shit, blown away, incredible. Like, wow. So thank you for making time for us today. It's been an honor to have you on.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on, guys.